Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Nicholas Wapshott. Nicholas is a journalist, author, biographer. His latest book is Samuelson Friedman, The Battle Over the Free Market, which is about the tension in economic ideologies between Paul Samuelson and Milton Friedman. Nicholas, we have a lot of room to cover. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a great pleasure, Alain. Nice to see you.
So I see you, I went to your Amazon page and you have all kind of books. You didn't always write about economics or economics theories or politicians. So can you tell us a little bit about how do you get into the field of writing?
I was a journalist all my life. I am a journalist, I guess, still. And alongside that, I've written books. And that came about because a literary agent in Edinburgh, where I first had my first job, read a lot of the stuff, interviews and so on that I'd written when I was 21, 22 years old, and said, would you like to write a book? And I said, you bet, but I'm not going to write a book for nothing, you know. I'm not just going to write a book and see whether anyone likes it. He said, no, that's not what we do. We'll give you an advance. He said, that's fine, because if you give me an advance, I'll finish it. So he said, I've got a publisher who would like a biography of Peter O'Toole, who was an English actor, Lawrence of Arabia and many other big movies. And so I said, oh, that sounds good. That sounds up my street. And so that was the beginning. So I got into biography, but I've done a lot of biographies and profiles and interviews in newspaper journalism. So for me, it was natural to write about people's lives because that's the way that people can understand more difficult concepts. The Samuelson Friedman book, if I'd written it purely as a matter of economic theory, no one would read it at all. I'm not prepared to spend so many hours of my life wasted on my own in a spare bedroom writing away if nobody reads the book. So if you engage people with the personification of the idea, then it works very well. And I found that with economics, this was a sort of, I've always been very keen on political and economic theory. It's a rare thing to be interested in theory of any sort, I suppose. It's a bit dry, but actually when I looked into it, the people who invented the theory were really very lively characters. And what's more, they hated each other. It wasn't just they disliked each other, they really hated each other. So the left and right, politically left and right in economics, as in politics, was set up pretty early on in the 20th century. And I started off with a book about John Maynard Keynes, the inventor of macroeconomics, and Friedrich Hayek, the guy who tried to stop him from publishing the book, saying you're misguided, it'll all go terribly wrong. That did very well. And this is really almost the sequel to that. When Keynes and Hayek were dead, Samuelson and Friedman continued their arguments and were just as rude about each other as Keynes and Hayek had been.
And may I ask you, where are you from? Are you from England or are you from the States or are you like half-half?
I'm really 100% English, but I've lived in New York for the last 20 years. And not that it matters, I've become an American citizen as well. I mean, the Queen wouldn't let me stop being a British citizen, so I'm both. But like everybody else in the world, I became an American citizen purely for economic reasons. That is, if I didn't become one, they would take a lot of money away from me when I left. So here I am, an economic outcast.
since I'm a Canadian citizen, I am a subject of the Queen as well. Whenever I became a Canadian citizen, I had to swear allegiance to the Queen. And so there we are.
Now, there's an interesting example of how a notion, a constitution, the state can be more efficient and more warm-hearted in a way towards its citizens by personifying it in the role of the woman, in this case, the Queen. And she doesn't have any discretion about anything. A lot of Americans misunderstand that they think she's like Henry VIII or something, that she could chop people's heads off if she wanted. She's purely the notion of the state personified in one, and the family is too. And it's in order to ensure that there's stability from year to year, decade to decade as time passes. And it's proved very, very efficient in Britain. But there you are, that's a pure example of theory being made more humane by personifying it.
Well, here we are. Okay, and now can you tell us about how do you stumble upon this? I mean, I can understand how you got into Keynes and Hayek, but how do you get into Samuelson and Friedman?
Well, the Keynes-Hayek book was a great success. It became an instant, found a place on everybody's reading list if you read economics at university. And therefore, my agent was certainly very pleased when I said, it carried on even after Keynes and Hayek had died. And that was true. Paul Samuelson became the high priest of Keynesianism. He wrote the Bible of Keynesianism, which is his textbook, which everybody who's read economics reads, is obliged to read. It is the book which he modestly called Economics, as if there was any alternative to it. And he wasn't a direct descendant, but someone who was very friendly with Hayek and befriended him on purpose and deliberately set out to try to tarnish Keynes's image was Milton Friedman. And so these two men, this is a joy for a biographer when you find out, they were effectively separated at birth. They were more or less the same age. Samuelson was a couple of years younger, in fact, though he was already at the University of Chicago by the time that Friedman got there. So Friedman was always conscious of the fact that Samuelson, who then became a great man, was somehow stealing his light. Friedman desperately wanted to be famous and rich and important. Samuelson, because he had a succession of scholarships to school and university, and people kept bombarding him with money, come and study with us, come and study with us. He had a really easy road, so he didn't have that anguish, and it suited his personality too. He was good at defending the status quo. Friedman was particularly good at prodding everybody in the chest and saying, hold on a minute, you're getting things wrong. And he was a self-publicist of the first order. I don't think that anyone lived, I mean, they both lived into their 90s. They both were friends, actually, through the whole of their lives, but also frenemies. They bit their tongues sometimes when they said, well done for winning the Nobel Prize. No, they were very fulsome in their praise when a real achievement was going on. But when it came to the arguments about whether, this is to do with whether a government should intervene or not into an economy which goes wrong. Free marketeers, Friedman, Hayek, say, no, you stand back and it'll cure itself like the jungle, it'll all grow back. And people like Keynes and Samuelson say, no, that's not good enough. We live in a democracy. People need jobs now. They don't need jobs down the line. As John Maynard Keynes famously said, in the long term, it's all very well, but in the long term, we're all dead.
Right.
And that's exactly what the argument is. In a way, it's to do with democracy. I think that Hayek and Friedman saw the expression of individuals came through how they operated in the market. And so the market, the price mechanism, was the best means of working out whether you had the right mix in a society. And that's not what Keynes and Samuelson believed. They believed that actually elected people should override the free market when the free market went wrong, when they were unemployed, when there's mass unemployment. This all came out, all of these arguments came out of the terrible 1930s, which was a whole decade of deep depression, when it's hard to believe it now, when the United States was absolutely on its knees with millions of people lining up for food banks. So we've got that now. We've got millions of people lining up for food banks and being given food stamps in America today. And it's a shock for everybody.
And okay, so we know these two economies from the perspective of the United States, but I wonder how much of their economic ideologies spread throughout the world. For example, I know that the Chilean government follow very much the Chicago boys or the Chicago way of thinking, and it had some success and now a counter reaction. I wonder if you could maybe tell us about some other examples of how the United States exported these ideologies.
Yes, I mean, I think that the market is in us all. You don't need to be told to go out and barter in a market, to go and try to find the right solution to exchange of goods. So the fact of the matter is that the market belongs to everybody, and that's in human nature, really. When two individuals want to do a deal with each other, they come to an agreement, and that's called price. What the Americans did, and really the French dismiss it as Anglo-Saxon economics, but what really Keynes did by inventing macroeconomics was explaining how to understand a very complex structure of economic behavior. And he thought that it was to be able to, having described how a machine worked, you could then work out how to improve its performance in order to benefit the people who live in the society. That too is universal. I mean, the laws of physics are universal. The laws of chemistry are universal. Actually, the laws of economics are universal too. But when people doubt whether a certain line of thought is accurate, But let me go back to the sense of the laws of economics, like the laws of chemistry and laws of physics are universal. That is, theory either applies to everything or it's not a very good theory. Macroeconomics was exactly that. It was really, Keynes invented something which otherwise had been rather primitive. People had looked at how individuals treated with each other. Whereas what Keynes said was that actually there's a structure, there's an interrelationship between all of these things. And that means that not only do we now know how things work much better, but also we can interfere with them. We can change them if we want to. If we want more employment and less inflation, we can adjust things accordingly. And it's the principle of whether you do intervene or not, which is what I've been exploring in the last 2 books.
Okay, so now could you tell us how these economic theories are being misinterpreted or misutilized by the press, by the media? How for example, Milton Friedman gets mischaracterized by their social ideology, or the same idea for Samuelson?
Yes, well, one of the problems with politicians is that they are rather slippery characters. They don't actually themselves believe necessarily in anything much, but what they do is to pander to people who do. There became a great movement in the United States for conservative economic theory, and Friedrich Hayek was elevated to a sainthood. But most unlikely, particularly for Friedrich Hayek, who was appalled by that. He didn't believe in that sort of thing. And he didn't believe that people should follow him blindly, not least misunderstanding him and following him blindly. That's one of the problems having supporters. Very often they believe in somebody else, not you, but they think it's you. And so the right, it all came about at the end of the Second World War, when communism, thanks to Stalin, who had taken Berlin and the capital of Hitler's Germany, now owned the eastern part of Europe. And there was no means of turning them back, really, unless you wanted to carry on World War II for another decade, which of course they didn't. So what Hayek was worried about was that intervention, as the Soviets is an extreme example of it, Lenin abolished the free market altogether and said the government can decide everything, the price of everything, the production of everything. Well, that's obviously impractical, as the Soviets found out, or the Soviet people found out very quickly. But there was in the rest of Europe, Western Europe, a sense that actually the old ways of running a society by capitalism alone, untrammeled, unfettered capitalism, had treated them so badly, particularly during the decade of the 30s and unemployment, that it's about time that governments took responsibility for how their people lived and should take control of the economy. Hayek was worried about that because he thought if you provide power to these people, they'll only keep it. There'll be a ratchet effect. If an official decides how many socks we need, how many shoes we need, that will always now be the case. And he said one of the problems is that the left have always had the benefit of idealism. They've had a notion of a utopia that we could all reach. But the right has never really had that. And the recent example, Hitler, is a very bad example of someone who said this is how the world could be. Everybody's blonde and Aryan and gorgeous, you know, and all races are stratified. He said that's not going to do it. What the conservatives need, what the right side of government needs, is for there to be an inspirational ideology. And he called together a lot of people into a meeting one summer's day in a ski resort in Switzerland. There was no snow, and the hotels were cheap. And this group of about 20 people, the Montpellier Society, set about trying to find an ideology for the right. One of the people who went there was very early on was Milton Friedman. And he got inspired by Hayek and inspired by the notion of finding a way to counter the left's ideology, which has always been so attractive to people, particularly young people. And so that's what they did. They set about doing it. Now, it means, however, that they really don't have a unified idea of what society should be. If you have a free society or a free market, which you keep out of, the government has no place interfering in the market. It means that everybody is in charge. Now, that sounds good democratically, but actually it makes for quite a big mess. And I think that Friedman's ideas are different from Hayek's ideas. All the right people on the right have very different versions of how you get to a nirvana, whereas the left are unified. And I'm frozen, Alan.
And in today's, hello, yes. In today's
okay.
In today's economic environment in the United States, whose ideology are we more close to? Are we more close to Friedman's or Samuelson? Or yeah, which ideology represents the United States right now?
Well, Samuelson won in the same way that Keynes won the argument. Samuelson said, when things are going wrong, you use Keynes, and when things are going fine, you can revert to the free market again. But it'll soon go wrong, and then you'll need Keynes again. And we've seen in two recent world traumas this to be the case. In 2008, there was the freezing of all of the banks, and the whole of society just ground to a halt. There's no banks could lend to each other. And we teetered on the brink of something pretty terrible. Ben Bernanke, who was the Federal Reserve Chairman, said that it was every bit as bad, probably would be worse if there hadn't been intervention, than the great slump of the 30s. And this became obvious to everybody. First of all, things need to be done fast, but they also need to be done to a plan. And actually, the person who got the car out of the ditch wasn't Obama, who gets the blame for the great stimulus that the Americans put into the world economy in order to keep it moving again. It was George W. Bush who thought that up, and his Treasury Secretary. So it shows that the Republicans actually were capable of understanding the Samuelson principle, that when things go wrong, you grab for your Keynes. And to give them credit, all of these conservative economists who spend their time sniping at Keynes, not one of them put their head above the parapet when it came to 2008. They didn't say, we've got a better idea, because they knew it wasn't a better idea. And the same's happened with COVID. Who would have imagined that actually the governments would deliberately close down the economies around the world? What's more, that they would intervene as bad as any communism ever was. That is, they would actually tell you what to wear, how far away to sit from people, whether you're allowed on a train or not. I mean, the minutiae of our daily lives. Stay at home, house arrest for everybody. That's a very big step. And again, that's because they needed to do something. What they're trying to do is to put back now the economy that was there before, the so-called new normal needs to return from the old days. And that is going to take some planning, and they're going about it in a pretty deliberate way. Whether it will work, heaven knows. But what we do know for certain is that once the economy is back on its feet and everybody's feeling happy again, that's when the conservative economists will come out of the woodwork and they'll say, you see, we didn't need Keynes ever. It's free market. And that's the circle that we go around.
So it's a pendulum. It's always swinging from one extreme to the other one, and whoever is winning, whoever is losing can point fingers to the other one, and until the pendulum swings back.
I should say, by the way, just to be fair, Friedman was an exceptional person, and he started off with economics with a debate with Samuelson about whether Keynes was right or wrong, but he built that out into something else, which has been very, very successful in the United States. He turned the conservatism of the Republican Party, which is in government at least as much as the Democrats, into really a libertarian view. He claimed he wasn't a conservative. Friedrich Hayek said he wasn't a conservative either. They said that they were libertarians, and those libertarian notions are the ones that have now taken over the modern, it's owned by Donald Trump for the time being. But the groundswell of support that it's attracted are people who say, I don't want the government, thank you, to interfere in my lives. I don't want the government to borrow on my behalf in order to save somebody else's neck. I don't want the government to treat people in the hospital that I don't approve of. That's the key to it. It's all up to me. And that heroic individualism, which America has championed right from the very beginning, this nation of immigrants, come, all of your poor, come everybody, and we'll found a new society here, actually has many of the bad aspects of the old Europe about it. And one of those is selfishness, greed. And they have been, by people like Hayek and Friedman, turned into virtues, which is slightly upside down if you've grown up in a sort of munificent way that I have.
I am an investor in the stock market, and one of the criticism that I hear more often about Friedman is that the corporation, Friedman says that the corporation, the sole focus is to provide returns for the shareholders. And of course, I hear that as a criticism all the time, that no, the corporation shouldn't just focus on the shareholder, but on the stakeholders of the whole society. I wonder where you stand on that.
Yeah, well, well, first of all, how Friedman stood on it. He said that actually the responsibility of a board of directors is purely to maximize profit.
Right.
That's what they're there for. In fact, you could probably sue them if they make a decision which doesn't maximize profit because they're not looking after your money properly. And that got a great number of converts. People agreed with that considerably. And he said it's up to governments. If governments want to regulate, that's up to them. We'll live within the regulations. But until then, the principle is that the corporations represent us, the investors. And that was been confirmed by the Supreme Court, who decided that actually corporations were people. And that under American law, anything that belonged to an individual now also belonged to a corporation, including giving money to political parties. That's why companies can just sign big checks to politicians that they prefer. That tilts the playing field, of course, in favor of the corporations. Already the corporations, American corporations, were in cahoots with the federal government to make sure that everything was, well, suited them. And there hasn't been, as much as there has in Canada or in Europe, movements to try to take power away from them through trade unions or through political action. I rather favor the democratic approach, I mean, the traditional democratic approach, which is that people should decide what they want through an electoral system and govern accordingly. What I can't subscribe to is the sense that every corporation has my best interest at heart, when it plainly doesn't. Everybody knows that the theory of capitalism and the practice of capitalism are quite different. The theory of capitalism is that everybody competes with each other and the people who benefit are the consumers, the customers. But we know full well that give it a little time and capitalism consolidates into, the worst, it's a monopoly. Right. But just as bad as a duopoly, or at the moment, America has 6 banks. That's not enough. 6 banks is not enough to compete, to provide that. So everybody ends up with the same price level. It's the same with Uber and Lyft. Everybody arrives at the same price level. They don't compete with each other. What's more, that romantic notion that conservatives have or capitalists have, which somehow the market will, in free competition, it will mean that the best comes out of it and the winner takes all. That's not how corporations work. If they want to get the next 20% of their market share, they buy their rivals out. It's much easier to buy their rivals out than to please customers, because it's bloody difficult to please customers. As anybody who's dealt with anything, that customer, why do they call customer service customer service? The missing element from the department you're talking to is customer service. And yet we're stuck on the phone for half an hour. And they're not even, your call is important to us. That's why we're leaving you hanging here for an hour, terrible, terrible. So nothing's perfect in society. But I think that if you live in a state which allows you the ability through collective action to make changes which benefit more people, democracy, I'm in favor of that. It's imperfect, but hey, everything's imperfect.
Well, Nicholas, the best thing about your book is that we don't arrive to a clear conclusion. There is always room to debate, and the reader has to find where in the spectrum, in that line, he has his own ideology. So I wonder if you could tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow you?
I happen to have a copy here. It's called Samuelson Friedman. And my name's Nicholas Wapshott. And if you put Samuelson or Friedman in Amazon, up it'll pop. Or get it through your local bookshop, which would be even nicer because your local bookshop could do with some trade, and Jeff Bezos doesn't need another cent. He's giving it all away already. His wife's giving it all away. His ex-wife's giving it away.
Yes, and you are, people can follow you on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter. I'm on everything. Yeah, I'm in Facebook. I'm on all those social media.
Perfect. All the links will be in the website.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Great pleasure, Alan. I'm trying to explain something pretty complex. And something which I think a lot of people don't think about theory at all. They don't think about conceptual things at all. They just get on with their lives. They're too busy living their lives to do this. But actually, if you step back just a little bit, you can see that ideas form shapes, and those shapes attract people into groups. And that's what political action is all about. Good to talk to you, Alan.
Thank you.